Welcome to She Shares. For many of you, you've been here time after time. For some of you, it's your first time. We are so excited today. We're starting our 5th season of She Shares, if you can believe that. We have heard from policymakers, education leaders, first ladies, a filmmaker, journalists, an ambassador, a judge, a chief of staff, and today we are adding to our ranks a White House press secretary. And more than that, but we'll learn about more than that. I just want to say this event was sold out so quickly that we had to change our seating arrangements into these rows. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the fact. Many of you have been sponsored from the beginning. We're starting our 1st season, and I want to just ask that you indulge me while I name each of our sponsors, because without them, we would not have these fabulous events. And please hold your applause till the end. First of all, I want to recognize our founding sponsors, Tina Thomas and Donna Lucas. Yeah. And now hold your applause. For our season sponsors, Kaiser, Oric, Manat, Accenture, the great Marcy Friedman, AT&T, Pfizer, the California Endowment, Stoll Reeves, State Farm, Nimala Pappas and Associates, Political Solutions, Kelly Boyd on behalf of KB8 Consulting, and Cassie Gilson for Sacramento Advocates. Round of applause for all these amazing sponsors. And I want to recognize, I'm knocking this over. I want to recognize our media sponsors, KCRA, the California Channel, and Comstocks Magazine. And please don't forget to pick up your Capital Region Cares edition of Comstocks out in the lobby. Thank you, media sponsors. And one more final piece of business before I bring out our special guest is I wanted to just note how much success we're having with our mentorship program. This year, we've almost doubled it. We have 22 pairs in our program, and I'll just ask people here, if you're a mentee or you're a mentor, can you just raise your hand? Look at that, that's awesome. So this is a great program. We'll hear more about it in the coming events and on social media. So now, without further ado, so about 32 years ago, in a small house on Santa Monica Boulevard, I met Dee Dee Myers when we were both deputy press secretaries for Walter Mondale. I was about 7 years old. She was about 20 or so. About 25 years ago, the fabulous Dee Dee took off on the Bill Clinton presidential campaign, starting in Little Rock, and ended up becoming the first woman press secretary to the President of the United States. Many people in this room were in Washington during those days when she was our femme lead, Nancy McFadden, Ann Hawley, Carrie Doan, Collie Harver. I see people in this room who are in Washington. Carrie, I'm sure I've missed some people, but you have watched her and seen her and grow over the years, and she's such a baseball freak. I know she won't mind me saying that those were really just kind of the spring training for what she's doing now, heading up global communications for one of the largest media companies in the world. And along the way, our families have had dinners together, many saucy vacations, in good times and in bad. And there's one thing I can say about Dee Dee Myers is that she's a natural at everything she does. From being a political staffer to a television celebrity, a best-selling author, a water skier, a hiker. She is, without question, one of the most loyal mothers, wives, sisters, daughters, and friends a person could ever have. And it took all of you to bring her here, because I've tried for years. So without any further ado, Dee Dee Myers and the fabulous Karen Breslau.
Just before the game. Wow. Dee Dee, I have to tell you, I was trying to figure out where we should start talking. And it's usually pretty clear in these conversations. And I had kind of a train wreck in my head because I had so many questions swirling about this campaign and the age that we're all living in. And we have, Dee Dee has gone on, as Karen just shared with you, to do some amazing things in her life. And we're going to get to all that. But I have to start with this bizarre campaign that we find ourselves in.
Bizarre is a good description.
And I want, you've been through some weird ones. I mean, the 92 campaign, which saw the rise of Bill Clinton, was unusual in many ways as well. But where on the spectrum of weirdness would you place the time we are living in now, this 2016 primary campaign?
Extreme weirdness.
Extreme weirdness.
Extreme weirdness. Yeah, I've never seen anything like it in my professional life, and even going back to read about previous campaigns over the last century, there's nothing. I mean, maybe there was when sort of Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton, but which wasn't even a political campaign, but it was a result of one. I've never seen anything like this, and I think we're not only seeing a very unusual campaign that doesn't fit any of the previous models. We're sort of seeing a realignment with longer-term consequences for American politics. I think the Republican Party is in the midst of a bit of an identity crisis. I think there's a lot of anger in the country, so it feels a little bit like a forest fire to me, where a lot of things are burning and some good stuff is probably going to get consumed along with some stuff that needs to go, and we'll have to wait to see what comes out and what survives and how we reorganize ourselves in the aftermath. But you can't even make predictions because there is no precedent on which to base decisions about the conversation. On the Republican side, because the Democratic side is actually turning out to be pretty conventional. You have a kind of a insider front runner and an outsider insurgent, and it's probably going to end up, I mean, it's hard to imagine that Hillary Clinton won't be the Democratic nominee, which is sort of what people would have expected a year ago, 2 years ago, even 3 years ago.
So let's go back to the Republicans for a second. What of the many sort of jaw-dropping moments in this campaign, which one stands out, on the Republican side, which one stands out for you?
Where do you start? I mean, first of all, that Donald Trump with his hair could be taken seriously.
Okay.
Can you imagine if a woman had equivalent hair? Like, there's no way she'd even get past the mentioning portion of the campaign, let alone be the most likely, if, it's hard to say. I mean, you can't say that Trump isn't the most likely nominee. He may not win, but at this moment, he's the most likely nominee. It could be that he's sort of gotten a test of wills with the Pope. That could be kind of bizarre. It could be that he attacked John McCain for being a prisoner of war. That was somehow his fault. The list goes on. It's crazy. Or that, Ted Cruz, I apologize to my Republican friends in the room, but seriously? That guy's a serious contender for president? I think it's telling when not one person you've ever worked for is supporting your campaign that you've worked with. Not a single member of Congress,
Right.
No one from his days in Texas. So, but I think it's just a weird time. And there is a lot, I think one of the things that Trump has helped to do, and I don't think this is necessarily a negative, is to unearth the depth of anger, right? The electorate is very angry. And in spite of all of the kind of, reality television show aspects of this, that is something that we should all be taking very seriously. And it's true on the Democratic side, too. I mean, the Bernie Sanders campaign is fueled by people's feeling of being left out, right? That there is a growing gap in income and distribution of wealth. The game on both sides, I think people feel like the game is rigged and that people who work hard and play by the rules can no longer get ahead. And so I think those of us who care about, and I think everyone in this room care about the future of the country, and trying to get back to a place where people feel like they can make a contribution and, again, get up, go to work, raise their kids and get ahead, is something that feels like it's slipping away from people.
Did you anticipate Hillary having the difficulty she's having in consolidating her support and pulling ahead? Did you think it was going to be this much of a struggle for her? You know this woman very, very well.
I do.
You worked in the White House with
Hillary.
her.
But yes,
yes, you saw it coming.
I think she was a fantastic Secretary of State. I think she was a fantastic United States Senator. She's not a great presidential candidate. This is not something, some people are good candidates. Some people are good leaders in elective office. Some people, like President Bill Clinton, are really good at both. Maybe President Reagan fits into that category too, where he's comfortable on the campaign trail, he's comfortable in the Oval Office making decisions. But there's very few people that do both things equally well. It's like being able to pitch and hit home runs, to use a baseball analogy, because I like baseball. But so, that's not her forte, is not as a candidate. And we could spend hours on the reasons for that, but so I think campaigning is harder for her than governing. I think she's I was struck at how, by both when she was in the Senate and when she was Secretary of State, once she had gotten through the campaign portions, how comfortably she fit into the role of leading in those two different capacities. So it does not surprise me that the campaign has in some ways been a struggle for her. And it's funny because the best coach in the entire world is her husband, right? No one understands campaigning and the poetry of campaigning better than Bill Clinton. And one of the things that we were talking earlier, he taught me was campaigns are always about the future, right? And so it's never about you as a candidate. It's about the future and it's about the voters, right? And what you have to kind of paint an aspirational picture for what does the world look like with Hillary Clinton as president, and why should we as voters care about that or join you in the quest for that? And I think she's still working on that. I think she can get there, but I think she's still working on it. It's got to be less I, more we. It's got to be less about the past and much more about the future. Voters don't really, they should care more in some ways about what your credentials are, but they don't.
And the trouble she's having with young women and with young people in general, how do you explain that and how can she fix it?
Well, it's exactly what I was just saying. It's the campaign, if you talk about your credentials, and I don't think Hillary Clinton has to talk about her credentials. I think people believe she's qualified. But I think that's partly a vestige of being a woman, that you always have to credential yourself, right? And for 40 years, she's been having to credential herself because people assume, like when people said in the last campaign in 2008, well, she's only been First Lady. What else has she done? Meanwhile, the guy she was running against had been a two-term state senator in Illinois and had spent 2 years in the United States Senate. Now, I love Barack Obama, but his resume next to Hillary's resume 8 years ago, why did she have to credential herself? So I think that's part of it. But I think she needs to stop doing that. I think the people who don't think she's qualified will never, ever, 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 ever think she's qualified. And the rest of us already agree that, like her or not, she's qualified. So let's move on. So let's talk about the future. I think, and particularly for young people. I remember so clearly when I graduated from college in 1983. So Karen was 7, I was in my early 20s when we met. But they were having the 20th year reunion for the class of 1963, and I remember thinking, wow, that was the year Kennedy was shot. That was ancient history. Okay, that was 20 years before I graduated from college. 20 years ago now seems like yesterday to me. But to college students, and I use that a lot when I would go to talk to college students. When I would talk about working for Bill Clinton, many of them weren't born, and the ones who were don't really see it as contemporary history. It's ancient history. So she needs to talk about the future, and she needs to talk about what is her vision for the future? Why is that different than it would be with Bernie Sanders as president or with whichever Republican becomes the nominee? And particularly for women, right? Why aren't young women supporting her? Well, she hasn't made the case to me, yet. And I think she can, and I hope she will. I think she definitely can. You know, it's not about voting for Hillary Clinton because she's a woman. I mean, I'm glad that she's running. I think it's important you know, it's great. But she has to talk about why having women in power will make things better for all of us, right? When we have diverse groups of decision makers around any table, we know, there's mountains of evidence that suggest that, not to suggest, prove that we get more creative solutions, we see our problems differently, we see a much, you know, wider range of issues we need to address, and we get to a better place. And that benefits everybody, not just women, not just girls, everybody, because young women don't want to leave their brothers, their boyfriends, their fathers, their husbands, their children behind. And so and they don't know what's coming for them personally on the professional front. A lot of good things, but challenges they can't imagine. And all of us in this room know what that means. Things are much better than they were when we were just starting out, but there's still challenges that we face as women. But you can't, you know, I know there's a lot of younger women in the mentees. You guys are starting to your careers. There's a lot of opportunity for you, and there are some challenges that are coming. You're going to experience them, and there's nothing I can say to you that will, you know, that will prevent you from having to go through some of that on your own. So she's got to stop sort of talking about it like that, like the world is unfair, and start talking about it like, why is it better when we have diverse groups of decision makers? And by the way, that's true not just of gender, right? It's true of race and religion and all kinds of ethnic backgrounds and rural versus urban. I mean, it just diverse groups of decision makers get us to a better place. So let's focus on that.
You've moved to an industry where the lack of diversity is
appalling.
Appalling, thank you, stunning. USC just came out with a study yesterday describing the lack of diversity in the entertainment industry. I think they called it a crisis and an epidemic. And some of the statistics were really striking. 80-something% of directors are male, 71% of screenwriters are male, 28% of speaking roles went to women. And obviously, in this room and in the rooms we've all been in, there's no shortage of women with speaking roles. But what do you do? I mean, you worked in the White House. You saw some of the unfairness there as a young woman making her mark. Now you're in a different industry. Why is this still happening in 2016?
You know, it's a great question, and I mean, I can't say I was totally surprised by it when I arrived at Warner Brothers a year and a half ago. And I have to say, I mean, I certainly have seen this coming, right? And it came on like a gangbusters when none of the 20 nominees for Best Actress, Best Actor, Supporting or Lead was not white. Studios like ours, it has to do with the guilds, like the Directors Guild and the Writers Guild and how they operate. It has to do with the agencies and how they represent talent. It has to do with the film schools and, you know, the whole. There's a lot of people who have the way that it all works together that makes it complicated. But I have to say that so I think we at Warner Brothers are very focused on how. I mean, we're not as far along as we should be, but how do we address that? And it's funny because it's a little bit counterintuitive, but this is very upsetting, right? Like you look at like how few women directors they are, and to me, it's equivalent to being a director on a film project. It's like being a CEO. You are the chief executive of the movie, and you know we still have problems in whether it's a Fortune 500 company, a governor. There's only like 4 female governors, so we're at 8% nationally. Fortune 500 CEOs, we're at, I don't know, 4 or 5%. And the same thing is true of movies, right? These are chief executives. Not an excuse, it's just, it's a example that executive leadership is still a challenge for women. So we have to address that. But so at the same time you see this is very upsetting. What you're seeing on the creative level is really exciting. In Hollywood, when you see some of we have a couple of different programs that we're involved in to mentor. There's sort of incubator programs that we have to incubate and bring along young talent. And the amount of talent out there, and the great ideas and the platforms for that talent, particularly because of the internet, there's all this sort of digital opportunity that didn't exist. I think we're going to work very hard to solve it in the short term, but in the medium term, I think there's you're just not going to be able to keep that talent out. And so I'm oddly optimistic, not about the next couple of years exactly, although I think that there's a lot of, like there was no shame in Hollywood until this year. And now
Right.
I think shame is an incredibly powerful motivator, and I think people are starting to feel a little ashamed. So I think that's good. And it's too bad it had to come to this. But I actually think that when you look at some of the exciting young talent that's out there and how diverse it is and how many women there are and how well some of the movies, you know, we're ultimately a for-profit business, right? So when you start to
One
see...
hopes, yeah.
Yeah, no, and you see movies like Straight Outta Compton, or our film
Yeah.
was, oh my God, Ryan Coogler with Sylvester Stallone. I can't believe I just blanked on the name of my own movie. Creed, which was a fantastic movie for those of you who can remember the name of it. But Ryan Coogler, who's from here, he's from your neighborhood, he's from Oakland, and those are just examples of movies that were not only critically acclaimed, not only told diverse stories, they were financially successful, right? And so that's I think is very exciting.
In the White House, you were very often the only woman at the table, the only staff person at the table. Do you find now in your job that you walk into a room and, by God, it's Dee Dee and a bunch of suits, or?
No, actually. I mean, look, it's not 50-50, but our company overall is about 50-50, and in the more senior ranks, it's about 40% when you get to sort of VP and above, and then when you get above that, it gets less. It depends on how you know, it's hard to define terms a little bit, but it's not 50-50. But I do not feel like I'm the only woman, not even close. I mean, there's a lot of really accomplished women at Warner Bros. And at other companies who are, you know, leading big parts of the business, who are as respected as anybody. But you know, it's not where it needs to be.
I want to go back a little bit to the White House days. You wrote in your excellent book, Why Women Should Rule the World, which I commend to all of you. It came out in 2008,
Yeah.
I think. Anyway, it's a
long time ago.
A long time ago, but it is still an incredibly relevant read. But you wrote about your conundrum in the White House. You were given a lesser title than most press secretaries. You were called Deputy Assistant to the President. You were given more responsibility than authority. And you wrote that you worried about, like many women, trying to navigate the elusive line between being authoritative and being a bitch, in the true Dee Dee direct style. How did you navigate that? And how do you explain that looking back now? I mean, that was 20-something years ago. Would a woman in the position today face the same obstacles that you do? That you did?
No, I mean, first of all, no, I don't think women today face the same obstacles. They still face obstacles, right? And but I do think I think it continues to be a challenge to how can you be authoritative and feminine, right? Or how do you be authoritative without being too authoritative, which again is the same thing as being a bitch. So how do you navigate that? And I think one of the answers is by having many different role models for how women are in roles of authority. And I think the more models there are, because there's a lot of different ways that men kind of live in a position of authority. And I think the more examples there are and the more different styles that we see that are successful, the easier it gets for all of us to kind of find that place where we can exercise leadership without worrying about that question. And I think I learned so much from Dianne Feinstein. I worked for Dianne when she was running for governor. That's where I think I met you, right, Dawn? I mean, didn't we? Oh, Duke Majan, that's right, that was Bradley, it was the election before that. They all my losing races run together. So yeah, it was Duke Majan, Bradley in where we first met. But I worked for Dianne, and she did a really great job, and still does a really great job of that, of being authoritative, and really she can hold a room, right, without seeming like she's steps over that line. And it was very helpful for me to spend a couple of years with her, because I learned a tremendous amount. You know, one of the most important things I learned from Dianne was, and those of you who know her well will recognize this, she just saying thank you when you're paid a compliment was something I learned from watching her. She would be like yelling at me in the car on the way to an event because she didn't like the speech, and you know, we've all worked for our elected leaders. And then she'd get there and someone would come up to her afterwards and say, "I loved your speech," and she would simply say, "Thank you, we worked hard on it." Or, you know, and so I think that is such an important lesson, particularly for you young women. How often do we hear women say, I didn't really like the speech, or, I didn't, it was nothing, or I hate, like this event, this part of it went wrong, it wasn't perfect. Stop now. Just say thank you, because own your accomplishments, own your power, own your authority. Just by saying thank you, or we worked hard, or my team was a great help on this, or whatever it is, so you can share the credit, but don't defer, don't deflect the credit, own it. And I think that's a very helpful thing for women in building the kind of profile to be leaders. And again, it was such a simple but important lesson for me, working with someone like Dianne Feinstein, and seeing the power effect of that. So, if you hear your friends, your employees, your partners, your sisters, not taking a compliment or not taking credit for the things that they do, stop them immediately. And remind them that they earned it, they own it, and it's really important for women to do that.
One of the other things you wrote about was being in the White House briefing room, being the voice of the administration to the entire world, and you had a verbal tic of saying, I think.
It's a great example of that.
And somebody, one of the reporters called you on it and said, for Christ's sake, why don't you know?
Right.
And when you look back on that, was that the woman
Totally.
in you, or was it the 31-year-old?
Well, it was both, and it's a little hard to unwind those two things, because as you all know, a 31-year-old woman as the first White House press secretary, and being from California, that's the trifecta of how not to go to Washington and to that job, and so these things did not work well together. I mean, really, one of the reporters in the briefing room said to me, "You're from California. Isn't the country slanted like this and all the nuts roll down to the West Coast?" Like, that was the mindset in DC 25 years ago, in spite of the fact that, Reagan and Nixon had been president and whatnot. But, so it was, but I tried, you come in, you're 31 years old and you're the first woman, and there's all these reporters, most of whom at that point were male, and most of whom were substantially older than I was, right? And I was having to do verbal battle with them every day. And so I did develop this verbal tic. I'd say, well, I think, it's more of a verbal tic, a way to sound less bossy. And it had obviously had an unintended consequence of making me sound like I didn't know what I was talking about.
I want to talk a little bit about your growing up. Who mentored you and who gave you the idea to get into politics and gave you the courage to be standing behind that podium at the age of 31 talking to the world?
Well, one of the great things about being young is you sort of have no idea what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? And so, it doesn't really occur to you till a little bit later that, wow, but you don't really have time to think about it. But, there were, my mom was a really huge influence for my sisters and for me. She married my dad when she was 19 and quit college. She stopped college in the middle. And then when I was growing up, she went back to school, got her master's degree, and started, created a program at a junior college in Southern California for women re-entering their careers, right? And so it was really, and then she, when all state budget cuts in education, something no one's ever heard of that. She went on to be a business executive and successful, and so and my dad too, who's a conservative. I don't know what he's going to do in this election cycle, but terrified to ask him. But he too was very supportive of my mom, right, which was a really important lesson that, he picked up the slack. He made dinner when she was at school on whatever nights, and he supported her. And that was also hugely important, that men could be and would be supportive, and what that meant to our family. So that was the most important thing. But then there was all this stuff going on in the 70s, and for me, and I talk about this in my book, when Billie Jean King played Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes, a tennis match, and he was the male chauvinist pig, and he was, quite a bit older than her, but an accomplished champion in his own right. And she played him, and it was for all the marbles, right? She had half of humanity on her shoulders. And I can remember watching her thinking, holy cow, she's gotta win, we've gotta win, our team's gotta win. And she did, she beat him in straight sets, and it was awesome. And that to me was like a really, she's still one of my heroes, just because that. And she talked in subsequent years about, like, she acted really calm, cool, and collected at the time, but how much pressure she actually felt. But she crushed him, and it was so gratifying. So there were little moments like that where you would see, and then I did have some great female mentors. One is a great friend of Karen's and mine named Allie Webb, she was the press secretary to then Mayor Tom Bradley, and then took a leave of absence to run the press office on the Mondale campaign, which was my first race. And then she hired me to work at City Hall a few years later. And so, she was doing it. She was a young white woman working for an African-American man, which was important because it said you didn't have to look like your boss, right? You could be a female and you could be white when he was male and he was black. And that was hugely important to me. And then she taught me everything she knew, no holds barred. Like, she wasn't like, she was just embraced, and mine and Karen's and many other young women, to try to help us to succeed at what we wanted to do. And so, she's still a close friend of both of ours and important. And then there were other women along the way, and men. There were men. So many of you know a guy named Bill Carrick, who's a big political consultant in the state. He ran Dianne Feinstein's campaign in 1990 and was a fantastic mentor to me and still a close friend. So, and then Bill Clinton, for this, for all of whatever we know about him now, he was gender blind in a professional sense. He was not blind, if you know what I'm saying, but he was gender blind in a professional sense. I love the man. He was great to me.
What do you make of him today?
I think he really, really, really wants Hillary to win.
Yeah.
And I think he's at a different place in his own life and career. And he doesn't. It's so much easier when you have his instincts and his skills to do it yourself than it ever would be to tell somebody else how to do it. But I sometimes think I see the thought bubble over his head. No, like this, it's so easy. But the world has changed, and he's not the candidate, and I think he's trying his hardest to be supportive, and he really wants her to win, but there's only so much you can do as the husband and the surrogate, and it's really complicated, especially for them, given, we haven't had this before, where the former First Lady is running for president, and her husband, the former president, is trying to be a surrogate, and obviously there's a lot of other complicating factors around their particular life and relationship, and it's just there's no playbook for that. And I mean, let's say she wins too. Then what? Right? What is he like? What do we even call it? I mean, we've kind of had
first laddie or something, right?
First dude, first lad,
yeah.
First man, or we just call it Bill. Maybe we just call it the Bill job, because but he is. The thing about him, too, the other thing I learned, besides elections are always about the future, there's so many things I learned, but he's the most relentlessly optimistic person I have ever known. And this is what his kind of, people who, didn't like him or his ideological opponents never really appreciated about him until later was he really truly believed in the power of government to make people's lives better. Right, and that unrelenting optimism can just wear the other side down after a while. Whatever comes back at you, he just kept on trying. No matter how many times you knocked him down, he kept on trying. And I do think that's one of the most important qualities in a leader in our political system is resilience and optimism. And I think Hillary has a lot of resilience, and she's preternaturally a little less optimistic than her husband. But I think if he can, help bring that optimism to her. Remind her, because I think she believes, she's a believer, but she gets lost in the details, whereas he never did. He never. I mean, he had bad days where he'd yell at you and stuff, but he never stopped believing it was worth it, not for a minute, no matter how bad it was.
You talked earlier about the incredible anger in the country that seems to be, finding its voice both on the left and the right. Where's the optimism in this campaign, and who's around to channel it?
Right. One of the things, again, I learned everything I knew in kindergarten or from Bill Clinton. He would talk all the time about we got to get people to vote their hope and not their fear. Mm-hmm. We don't have that candidate right now who's trying to figure out how do we get people to vote their hope, because if we work together, that he would say, we can make tomorrow can be better than today. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. If I ever hear that song again, I'm gonna slip my wrist. But we did, that was totally authentic, right? We would have how do we get people to vote their hopes and not their fears? And now we're in an election cycle where everyone's voting their fears. And it's so bad for the country. So where is that leader? I don't know. Maybe Hillary can be that leader. I knew John Kasich when he was in the House, and he was, the Republican opposition, but he was always a guy you could work with, right? He was always a reasonable guy who really was trying to do the best he could to be true to his ideals, but also get stuff done. That guy could be a great candidate. I think he'd be very dangerous for Democrats because he's optimistic, he's inclusive, and he's conservative. But so a Hillary Kasich campaign could be very interesting. I prefer to run against someone who's a horrible candidate from the Republican side, but I do think there's something in his voice that I find uplifting, and I wish there was more of that in this election cycle.
And of the remaining candidates on the Republican side, who would you like to see Hillary run against?
Ben Carson, obviously.
Clear. I want to go back a little bit to your growing up. Was your family political? I know your sister Betsy worked in the White House. I can't think of too many sister acts who've worked in different White Houses. Was politics part of the family dinner conversation, or
it was more current events. It was more current events. I mean, we sort of paid attention to the news, and my parents were not particularly political. My dad was Navy vet, as your dad was the Air Force, and he's pretty conservative. But and my mom was a Republican. And she's since seen the light, and now she's like constantly like emailing Congress, so which is great. So she and my dad cancel each other out, but so we weren't particularly political, but we were current events. I guess where I got besides being interested in the world, and I always paid attention to what was going on. I went to Santa Clara, which is a Jesuit college, as you know, and my dad, my conservative Catholic father, was thrilled. He thought, now I'm sending her to a Catholic college, I've done my duty, and I came out like a raging left-wing liberation theologist. And he was like, what in the heck? But I think that it was that sense of social justice that I learned that was, I had learned it actually in a little bit from growing up, but it was really kind of, it really kind of consolidated in sort of my worldview when I was in college. And so, sort of how do you, and then politics for me became the instrument by which I wanted to try to make the world a fairer, juster place.
Did you have a career in mind as a kid? Were you going to be an animal doctor or a teacher?
When I was in second grade, the teacher asked us to draw a picture of what do you want to be when you grow up. And I was at a Catholic school. My dad was in Vietnam, so we were at my grandmother's in Racine, Wisconsin. And I remember sitting there thinking, nurse, nun, teacher. Okay, that was and the kid next to me drew a picture of himself as a TV repairman. I remember his name was Robert Cole, I still remember. And I thought, God, I don't think I want to be a TV repairman, but he has so many more choices than I do. So I drew teacher, because like nurse and nun didn't really, it was a small pool. But then when I was in high school, I had no idea. I was good. I didn't think I could write. Not something I spent a lot of time on in high school. But I was pretty good at math and science. So I was a biology major when I was a freshman. And I thought, oh, okay, what do you do with a biology major? You go to medical school. So that's what I thought for about a year, till I started taking chemistry classes in college, and I'm like, okay, not this. But I took a poli-sci class, and that's totally just changed. Then I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with. I had no idea. I didn't know you could work on. I didn't know that you could get a job on campaigns. It just was not anything I had ever known about or thought about. But I knew that I was passionate about that topic. And so I always tell my parents don't always want to hear this, but I always tell the kids, do whatever you want. Do whatever lights your fire, because who knows where this world is going to take you? How many people work in a field that is directly related to the undergraduate degree they got in college, right? I sort of do, but it was an accident, or not an accident, because I followed something that I really was passionate about. But it's not like I studied to be a campaign aide. I was my emphasis was in international relations, which I didn't do anything. For a long time, it didn't have anything to do with running city council or state legislative or mayors or governors races in California. But I loved it. And I was so well paid. How could you not love it? I mean, I make $900 a month on the Mondale campaign. But I worked weekends and evenings sometimes at Bullock's in the China department to pay my rent, but it was totally worth it. Plus, you could meet cute guys in the China department because they would come in to buy wedding gifts, and guys in their 20s, right? And they had no clue, so they had to ask the nice, very helpful sales girl for help, and that was me.
You're getting into Gloria Steinem territory here.
If I looked like Gloria Steinem, I might have upgraded to the Playboy Club, but.
So we're going to get to audience questions in just a minute, but we have a little tradition here at She Shares, which is our 10 questions. Don't think, just answer.
Okay.
Okay, ready? What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'm kind of doing it because I was in politics for a long time, and I always kind of thought I would like to, like, what would it be like to work at a movie studio? And I'm kind of doing it.
Okay, great.
So, and it's great. I love it.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
To fly. Come on.
If you had to,
It's obvious.
To
Maybe
des-
laser eyes, though, so I could stop my kids in their tracks.
if you had to describe yourself in 3 words, which would you choose?
Chatty. I don't know. 3 words. I think I'm not too serious. That's 3 words. Sorry.
Okay, I'll take it.
Unserious. That's the second
Unserious?
word. Not because I'm not unserious, but I try not to take myself too seriously.
Authoritative.
Very powerful. That would be the first
Okay,
word I would choose. But see, like, there's no woman in this room that would choose the word powerful. And can you imagine Donald Trump saying anything other than badass, powerful, mofo? So yes, no, I would not choose that word. But
What advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
no, there's no advice I could give my 18-year-old self that my 18-year-old self would have taken.
So true.
But I would say, and I would still say this, expect to fall down, and as long as you get up, everything will be okay.
What are the advantages of getting older?
There's
Not
a
that-
lot,
not that we would know,
actually.
but-
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I've been told that, no, I mean, I think having perspective is a gift. I really do. I think that knowing the difference between a real crisis and a not crisis, for example, in your work world, knowing that it feels really hopeless right now or really challenging, but that there's a way out, that you can actually make things happen, and that patience is, it really is a virtue in many ways, and that you can speak your mind. I do think that age gives you authority. In addition to all the other things it gives you, but it gives you authority, and so, but also to use that authority judiciously. Mm-hmm. Nora Ephron, the great late director-writer, said when she was directing her first movie, this is such a non sequitur, but I think it's important for people in leadership positions. She said Rob Reiner gave her great advice. He said, "You're the director, and you're the boss. And if you're on location in Alaska in January and you say, blueberries sound delicious, some poor son of a bitch is going to be on a plane trying to get you blueberries. So just be very careful about what you say. And I think for all of us that's important, that when you're the boss, or when you have people that are trying to that work for you or whatever, that what you say, whether you say something that's personal or dismissive, whatever, be careful.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to edit, and we're going to open up.
I can't give a short answer.
Because you can't give a short answer. But because I see we have so much to talk about, and I know people are burning with questions. Are the Republicans going to kneecap Donald Trump before next Tuesday? Is Hillary going to pull it out? So many questions. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Michelle is in the back. She has a mic. If you have a question, if you could just raise your hand, Michelle will bring the mic to you. And just introduce yourself to Dee Dee and fire away.
Hi, I'm Brianna Mullen. I work for the state superintendent. You write a lot about women's willingness to share credit and build coalitions as a strategy for success that we have. And simultaneously, it's our greatest weakness because we don't claim individual credit. And how can we balance between building coalitions and being there for the work while taking credit ourselves?
Right. I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. In fact, I think that in some ways they reinforce each other. So, you know, for example, when you, so those of you, I've never worked in a big company, this is the first time, but in many organizations, you have a period at the end of the year where you go in, right, and maybe you get an evaluation from your boss. And so you first of all, don't ever go into that unprepared, right? That's a pretty simple thing, like, what did you accomplish this year? What did you do well? Let's start with what did we do well? And then maybe what do you want to work on for the coming year? And as a person who's a supervisor, like, I always want to hear, like, what are your ideas? Like, I may not agree with them, but I want to know that you're thinking about the problem. So, but then when you're talking about what did I accomplish this year, like my team, I think it's a reinforcing thing to say, you know, Paul did this and Steve did that, and you know, Sally did this, and together we got this result. Now that's sharing credit. But you're taking credit for running your team and achieving the results that you needed to achieve. And so I do not think those things are mutually exclusive. If you say thank you, we worked really hard, I couldn't have done it without, or we couldn't have done it without working together, I think that makes you stronger. But I do think you have to own the accomplishment of whatever it is. And I cannot tell you how important I think that is. You know, my book, when I started, one of the things I got to do was go around and interview a lot of interesting women, and they all had stories about how women that worked with them or for them, like, wouldn't do that, or did it when it was too late. They would, you know, I thought you knew, right? Well, we're all kind of busy and not paying attention to everything that another person is doing, so don't necessarily know the ins and outs. So, you know, you don't have to do it in a bragging way. You don't have to do it in a way that's sort of self-aggrandizing, but you can still do it. And one of the things I did at Glover Park, was me and my posse of women, because we had a lot of really great women in the firm. We said, okay, we'll get together periodically and we'll talk about what we've accomplished, and then to reinforce that, we'll go talk about you. Right? So I'm going to go tell everyone all the great things that Karen is doing. It was just one more way to make sure, and then so that we were all talking about what everyone was doing to reinforce that the credit that we felt that the other women in the firm deserved, and, you know, sometimes got and sometimes, quite frankly, did not. Did not, yeah. So there's a lot of strategies. So work together with the women that you are, and even the men. I mean, I think that. You know, it depends on the circumstances, but men, you know, you can have conversations about how do we talk about what we just did, right? I mean, those are, I think everyone's interested in trying to figure that out. Good.
All right. We have a question up here.
Hi, Ian Marshall with AT&T. You have been helping people with so many successful campaigns and had very insightful, you know, observations. Have you ever thought about doing one for yourself?
Running for political office?
Yes.
You know, not really. Part of the, it's just not something that's ever been interesting to me. My sister, for those of you who know my sister, I think would be excellent at it. She should run, but it's just not something, you know, it's just, I don't know. I can't explain why, but I never had the bug. Partly it was, at one point I might have thought about it, but I lived in Washington, D.C., and I was from California, right? And so I wasn't going to go back. You guys know Santa Clarita, where I'm from. I wasn't going to win there, so I didn't really have and I was more interested in federal elective office than in state, because I had spent so much time in it, that there was really, I didn't see an opportunity either. So if I had seen an opportunity, it might have changed the way I felt about it, but I wasn't burning to do it, and I didn't see an opportunity, and so it's not something I ever expect to do.
It's true, though, that women have to be asked to run for office, right?
Totally.
And men are elbowing each other out of the way.
Totally.
Yeah?
I mean, you see that all the time. Like, you'd say, when you know, my good friend Rahm Emanuel was trying to recruit people to run for office, he'd go, like, you know, the women, like, he'd go, here's the 5 or 6 qualities that you need to be successful. The men would go, I got one, I'm going to run. And the women will be like, well, I have 5 of the 6, and if you come back to me in 4 years, I might be ready. And by then, the unqualified guy is Speaker of the House. Yes, and so I do think we have to be more willing to raise our hands, right?
Yeah.
And this is true story. I wasn't gonna write I thought about writing a book, and then I kind of went back and forth for a while, and I thought, I don't know. I mean, like, could I be successful at that? And then Pat Buchanan wrote a book. He wrote many books, but one came out at that time, where he raised questions about whether the Holocaust had happened, right? I thought, okay, if Pat Buchanan can write this book and be taken seriously, I can write a book. Because I just looked at the, like who was, like, sometimes it's helpful to, to look around and say, like, the people that are succeeding at these things are no more qualified than I am. They really aren't. I mean, you have to work hard, of course. We're willing to do that, and you have to take some risks, and that's something women need to get a little bit better at. We need to be. That's same vein, right? Being willing to raise your hand and say, "What's the worst thing that can happen to me?" Okay, I won't get elected, or my book won't sell, or whatever. But at the end of the day, you never know.
Let's see. Anybody else? Yes, right here. Michelle. Okay, I see some on that side too. So we'll get to this side too. I see you guys. Sorry.
Jane Einhorn from Runyon Salzman Einhorn. I'm curious to know, what was your worst day as in charge of the news media, and how did you solve whatever mess you got into?
Well, a lot of times that's true. I cleaned up the mess. But there's actually an answer to this question, and it's I do talk about this in my book. It's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it short. If you guys remember, those of you who were around, there was an assassination attempt on President George Herbert Walker Bush, and when Clinton was president. And so the FBI began an investigation into who they thought it was going to be. And they said, okay, when we figured out, we'll tell the president. And so I, as the press secretary, said, the FBI is investigating, and when they reach a conclusion, they'll forward the results to the president. He'll make a decision about how to proceed. So periodically I would get asked, and I would give the same answer. And then one Friday I checked in with the NSC, and there was no change. So I got asked. I didn't get asked this question that often, but I happened to get asked that Friday. Well, it turned out, unbeknownst to me, the FBI had already forwarded the results to President Clinton. They fingered Saddam Hussein, and the president was in the process of deciding to bomb the defense ministry in Baghdad, all unbeknownst to me. So I gave the same answer. The FBI is still deciding when they get that. Meanwhile, there's plans in place. So the next day was Saturday, which is that's one day from the next Monday workday in the White House. So I was there, and I was getting ready to leave in the afternoon, and David Gergen came in and said, "You got to be back here at 5." I was like, "Oh. What is it?" He goes, "Well, I can't tell you, but don't just be back." So I was like, I don't know. I thought it was I had no idea what it was, but I didn't think it was a national security crisis. So it turned out that, meantime, I told the press, you guys can all leave. There's no more news today. So I came back at 5 to find out that we're about to launch an attack, President Clinton's first military engagement we were going to fire 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles from ships in the Mediterranean to Baghdad, targeted on the defense ministry, and we were going to sit there for 4 hours and wait for the missiles to land. In which case I knew I was, I had twice now given them incorrect guidance about something super important. And it was, fortunately the attack went well, the missiles hit their target, very little collateral damage, only one person in the building, and he was killed, but could have been worse. And the maneuver, the whole thing was successfully handled by the new president. But I was totally hanging out there, and so I went to the president and I said, "You can't. This is unsustainable. It's unsustainable for me." He was very sorry, but the damage was done. So I said, we've got to make some changes, which we, were sort of able to do. But it was extremely personally painful for me.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take one last question.
And by the way, let me just say one more thing about it. In hindsight, no, this is really important because I was really angry about it, as you can imagine. But I made a very critical mistake right, which I realized, it took me a couple years to figure it out. I set up the guidance wrong, right? So I think owning your mistakes is really important, right, and understanding what I could have done differently to prevent that. I said, when the president receives the confirmation or the whatever results from the FBI, he will make a decision, and he'll, they'll forward the results to the president, and he'll make a decision. I set up a little bit of a ticking clock. I should have said, that'll all happen, and until then, I got nothing to say. And I will no comment, nothing to add, and that would have protected me. But that on me. I mean, on them too, but on me. I could have, they should have handled it differently, right, President Gergen, but I could have handled it differently too.
Right. But you were trying,
so it's not
as a press secretary, to do your job.
Right. So it gives, and in owning it, it gives you more power. Even though it's painful to say I made a mistake, it gives me more power. I can get better at my job. I can do that differently next time. I'm not a victim, right? They could have done it better too, but I could have done it better too. Okay, on me, I'm learning, I'm going forward.
Okay. We're going to take one last question, and then maybe Dee Dee will be kind enough to take a few after. I know people have to get going. Yeah.
Hi, this is Marisa Escobar from the Stockholm Environment Institute. And my question is, first, your view about the future is very hopeful, right? The young people, the new talent, so that's very exciting, and we all can see that. But for those of us that are in the workplace already, and we don't have 40, 50 years to go, but 20, 30, so less time.
Yeah.
So what kinds of changes can we do now for things to change around us better? Is it our own attitude towards things, or more intentional efforts to make things change around us?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know that I have a great answer. I think change happens in ways big and small, right? But I do think changing our own attitudes, that's always the right place to start. And I think owning our own power. I think that's probably the single most important thing that we can do, particularly as role models and mentors to young women, is to own our own power, right? I mean, we do have the ability to affect change, whether it's how we treat the people we work with, how we think about the problems and the projects or the challenges that we face at work or at home, but to own our own power. And that includes learning from our mistakes, right? Which is, again, such an empowering thing, and it seems counterintuitive, but it's not. To own your mistakes and understand that you could do it differently and move forward, and to teach that to other people, and to work with, when somebody you're working with or somebody you're working for you makes a mistake, to not, obviously if there's consequences, they need to be accountable, but at the same time, how could we have done this differently, right? I mean, I think that's really, and particularly with the women, because I think one of the things, in addition to women not raising their hand to run for office, for example, if women lose, they tend not to run again, right? Or if they tend to raise their hand for promotion, they don't get it, they don't necessarily raise their hand the next time. No, we got to keep trying, okay? Maybe there wasn't a lot you could have done the first time, but probably there is something you could have done differently. Did you make sure the people deciding on the promotion knew what you had accomplished? Were you able to communicate that in a way that you felt comfortable with? And did you go and get advice from other people in your workplace that might have helped you shape the pitch a little bit differently? I mean, there are almost always things that we can do to make it better. It's owning our own power. We're not victims. We are empowered women and a couple good men who can change the world sheerly through our example and through our willingness to make it so. And look, I mean, we all face challenges that are bigger than us at times, but so many things we can make better just by that exercise of, I own it. So own your power, help your women friends and your men friends own their power, help young women understand that taking credit, and help everyone understand taking credit for what you do helps other women. Because if you succeed, the more women succeed. Right? The more women we see in positions of authority, the more women that do it, the easier it gets for all of us. So it is important that you own it, that you take credit. I think so often women are like, well, that's just me. No, it's not just you. It's creating an environment where women are given opportunities. And every time you own your accomplishments and own your power, you're making it that much easier for the other women, your peers, your mentees, your younger women to rise up. So with that, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
thank Dee Dee Myers. I want to thank all of you. This concludes She Shares. We're going to get to you. And I want to thank the hardworking crew at Dewey Square Group and Lucas Public Affairs for putting on this great event. And also to let you know, you're going to get a Survey Monkey when you get back to your office. We really want to know what you think of our new space and what you think of the event. So take 2 minutes and let us know what you think. And we'll be in touch with our next edition of She Shares. Thank you.